What do we need to know about what you've looked at as it pertains to Shane Waldron's offense? Like, what does that look like?
A lot of inside zone. Uh, boy, a lot of inside zone. Like they're going to pound the rock pretty consistently. You're going to see a lot of what's called split zone, where the tight end's going to be off and they come across the backside of the run scheme and they kick out the backside edge player to kind of create that cutback lane. That's going to turn into some really fun RPO looks, some really fun play action looks. I'd be willing to bet that Caleb's going to be under center a lot more than he was used to at USC. But he's been practicing that footwork pretty consistently down in Florida with Will Hewlett and Tom Gormley. So like he's perfectly capable of operating under center for the majority of the time if he needs to, but it is going to be different for him. He's going to have to turn his back to the defense probably a lot more than he's used to as well. But if anybody can transition from being in a pretty air raid heavy system to being in a more traditional under center style system very quickly, I think it's Caleb, because he's really smart, he's really gifted, and his whole team has basically been preparing him to play in this offense since his last college game ended.
At the risk of this causing me anxiety, I have to ask you the objective role of the center position. I don't want to put any name on it, but does this scheme, as you've seen it, this inside zone heavy or split zone scheme, does it make the individual ability of the center more important, less important, or is it a wash?
I would say in any run scheme, center is by far the most undervalued position because a lot of run schemes just don't work if you don't have a good center. Especially wide zone heavy offenses, which they are going to run a bunch of wide zone, I'd bet, because Caleb's so athletic. And why wouldn't you? Because that opens up the boot game and everything like that. But if you don't have a center that can reach block a shade all by himself, then that causes problems elsewhere in the blocking scheme because now your guard has to help them, which means they're not getting out on the second level quick enough to maybe catch a 220-pound linebacker that's super fast in the modern NFL. So like these guards got to get out immediately because the linebackers are so fast, which means you need a center that can kind of operate by themselves. And then, in inside zone or in duo, like you need a center that can dig somebody out, like because you're working those double teams on these big, 320, 330-pound noses as well. You need somebody who can actually dig people out in the line of scrimmage so that you can get enough vertical displacement so that again the guards can get off and go to the second level. If you have a weak center, pretty much nothing works. And
Mm.
unfortunately, there's been some years where center's been a pretty big struggle in Chicago. And we've seen it not just in pass pro, but also in the run game. Like when you can't run the ball, usually it's because you don't have a good center.
When you were breaking down Caleb's tape, what stood out, and was there anything that gave you concern about him transitioning to the next level?
Nothing real, I would say. Like obviously there was the hero ball stuff because he knew his team wasn't very good. He was trying to win a national championship. Like he already got all the personal accolades. Like he really wanted to win a natty, and he felt like it was kind of slipping through his fingers, and it caused him to make some mistakes that he shouldn't have made. Um, but even he would admit that. Even he, would say like, yeah, I tried to put on the cape too many times. He was trying to win ball games. I'm not really going to fault him that much for that. But as far as, can he play in structure? Yes. Like I would say he's just as good in structure as he is out of structure. Can he make every single throw you need him to make? Yes. Does he have every single club in the bag in terms of types of throws? Yes. Is he a great leader? Yes. We've been to my podcast partner EJ, who's been on the score actually multiple times at this point. So Chicago knows him very well. He's a diehard Bears fan. We've been to multiple USC programs, pro days in a row, talking to his teammates, getting to know people in the building. Everybody at USC would kill for that kid. Like he is the undisputed, unquestioned leader of that program. He's the true CEO of that program. So I have zero concerns about him, becoming a leader early on in Chicago. Um, there's really nothing wrong with the kid, to be honest. And I think a lot of unfair criticism has been levied his way over the last 12 months. personally, like by the end of September, when he's throwing for like 300 yards a game, and all of a sudden it looks like the Bears actually have a shot of beating the Packers and challenge for the division, I think we're going to look back and we're going to say, God, why were we so unfair to this kid?
Okay, then let's flip the question a little bit. Was there anything when you were watching the film you're like, man, I didn't know he could do that?
Hmm. I would say work the middle of the field. And I'm talking like really, really tough throws that are layered in between linebackers and safeties that are hitting really tight windows. Just because a lot of air raid quarterbacks that we see, they're not asked to hit those windows that frequently. A lot of it is like, hey, we're lining up, on a hash, so we have infinite space to the field. Let's throw slot fades all day. Let's throw speed outs against corners that are sitting 8 yards off. Let's take all the stuff that's outside the hashes, outside the numbers, because it's just free. You don't really see, quarterbacks working these tight over the middle windows like you kind of have to do in the NFL because the hashes are narrower, so the NFL plays more in the middle of the field. And we saw him do that a lot at USC, especially last year. And I'm like, oh, okay, if he's already got that in his bag, like we're good, because you can't be good in the NFL without working the middle of the field. And he really is good at working the middle of the field.
Yeah, I've been fixating on the middle and deep of the field in general because that's where the big plays are at the most critical times. And too often when we start to see these spray charts or the post game heat maps of where the passes are going, I much prefer the teams with the guts to keep testing that part of the field.
Mm-hmm.
What trends right now? It's one thing to say, okay, I've got George Kittle or I have Travis Kelce or you've got some unique ability to do that. But outside of personnel advantages, what trends are you noticing for teams to find those plays at important times?
Motion at the snap has been a big one, and obviously we saw that a lot with Miami. They kind of pushed that to the absolute maximum last year. 87% of all their snaps had motion, and over 400 of those snaps had motion at the snap. And what that does is it kind of creates conflict in the defense where, a lot of defenses that are playing zone match, they're operating off of a count, right? So if you've got two receivers to one side, two receivers to the other. You're counting 1, 2. Okay, we're going to build a triangle around these guys. So if he breaks in and out, I've got him. If he breaks in or short and out, I've got him. If he breaks short and in, you've got him. If he goes deep, we have our deep guy in the triangle that takes him. And so they kind of build these triangles. But if you have motion at the snap, and all of a sudden they go from 2x2 to 3x1 at the snap, now you got to build a box all of a sudden, not a triangle. And so it kind of creates these communication errors where, you're trying to play 4/3 in an instant when you were just playing 3/2. And it can just cause DBs to back up and kind of concede space. And we saw Miami take advantage of that. They were just manufacturing space by using all this motion. Now, how teams kind of countered that later in the year is they realized, okay, well, only one guy can be in motion, so we're just going to play man against everybody and then double the motion guy, and we're going to make them beat us with everybody else. So if Tyreek's in motion, we're going to get a bracket on Tyreek, and then we're going to have L'Jarius, go beat the snot out of somebody else on the line of scrimmage and make them do that. And Miami couldn't really punch their way out of that box. You look at Chicago, I think they're a team that's ripe to abuse this trend because they have so many guys that are good against press coverage that if DJ's the motion man, we force a bracket on him. Okay.
Keenan Allen is, yeah.
Yeah. The Keenan's one-on-one, Rome's one-on-one against press, which is literally what he does. So, I think the Bears are actually in a good position to take everything Miami did last year and then just do it better, which sounds terrifying, and it is terrifying. Like other teams in the NFC North should be afraid of that.
We're excited about all the things that can happen with the Bears in 11 personnel, but I'm kind of excited about what might happen in 12 personnel because of what some people told me about what Shane does in his offense. Could this offense be really beneficial from a statistical standpoint for Kollman?
Oh yeah, yeah, absolutely. Because if you look at what they do, what Waldron has done with 12 personnel is It almost kind of reminds me of like the early 2010s Patriots sometimes, where he'll have two tight ends on the field, but he'll run concepts that you don't typically see from 12 personnel. They'll run two back runs out of that stuff. They'll run 11 personnel passing concepts out of that stuff. Just because they have two tight ends on the field doesn't mean they're going to be boring and call like normal 12 personnel plays. And that's kind of why I think Waldron's a good fit here, is because yes, they're going to do a lot of the inside zone stuff, a lot of the split zone stuff, a lot of the wide zone stuff that we're used to seeing from that coaching tree. But there's also a little extra flavor there that I've always really admired. I think he's a really good OC, and as far as play callers that they could have hired to guide Caleb in his first couple of years here, I thought Waldron was one of the best candidates they could have got.
It's really interesting you bring that up because I was in my notes was going to ask about the way we want to put tight ends in a bucket, and we want to say, all right, you are an inline Y tight end, and you can
Hmm.
run Y flag or what the seam stuff, and then we want to say like
You're a U tight
you're
end.
a U tight end,
You're
like
the garbage man. You're
the
doing
move,
this.
the move guy, and all the stuff like when the Bears got Trey Burton and everything under Matt Nagy and the way it's been used, not just in the Andy Reid system, but when you mentioned the Patriots, that's different. I mean, I don't want to get too wonky here, but to the best of my memory, that's based on Earhart Perkins
Hmm.
tree packaged play stuff, which was different, and it's all commingled and evolved and gone off in a bunch of different directions. With the signing of Gerald Everett, how do you see the what's the most efficient and maybe the most deceptive usage of both the Bears tight ends in this system?
Yeah, Earhart Perkins, good pull. And, what kind of defines that system is, it's funny because you can kind of almost see like the air raid roots in that like Patriots offense that they ran for 20 years, because they have these passing concepts that are just like combined route patterns, excuse me, that they just assign a word to, right? So Hoss is like a hitch in a seam. Hoss juke is a hitch in a seam with a little juke route inside of it. So there's a two-man word and a three-man word, and then just whatever formation they're in, if you say that word, everybody knows their job, which is a very air raidy type thing, right?
Mhm.
And so that's why they were so good when they had those two tight ends, was they could, Tom could literally sit at the line and just say a word, didn't have to change formation, didn't have to change personnel, because everybody, regardless of personnel formation, they knew what the exact pattern was supposed to be for everybody. So they knew exactly what they were supposed to run. They knew what everybody else was going to run, and that's why they were so deadly, is because they could get into anything from any look. Now, I'm not saying Waldron does that kind of stuff, but when you have a guy like Everett, who, he's smaller than Komet, but you can run a lot of like wide receiver type routes that you're not used to seeing tight ends run with him. Like, you can kind of do a lot of similar things in terms of what you're asking him to do as a receiver. Like, it's not just you're running to the flat, you're running a seam. If the safety leans the wrong way, we throw it 8 feet high and you go get it. Like, he's not going to do all the normal tight end stuff. You can also run, a really sexy bang eight with him. You can run a blaze out. Like, you can run double moves. Like, if you want to run sluggo seam where like he's the primary, you can do that because he's got good feet and he's got good hips and he runs like a wide receiver. So in terms of like offensive structure and what they call plays, it'll be different than that old Earhart Perkins stuff. But in terms of the types of routes you see him running and how they use him, I think it could be fairly similar. Which again, if he's the fifth name you're talking about behind DJ and Keenan and Rome and Komet and all these running backs, and like your fifth to seventh name is Gerald Everett, you got a pretty good offense here. Like, I'm excited about it.
Brett, I know you've been doing a lot of breakdown of cover two, and I spent the majority of my time as a beat reporter covering the Lovie Smith cover two. And it's a little bit mutated because of what Brian Urlacher could do.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, his ability to
Little
cover
bit.
the middle third was unheard of. I'm curious when you look at this particular version of cover two, because I do feel like there's a little bit of Matt Eberflus having to play with one arm behind his back because they haven't gotten a consistent three technique. What would you suggest they need to do to make sure to maximize what Montez Sweat can do on the outside. Do they have enough here rotating at 3 technique, or is that still a position of need for the Bears?
Yeah, man, Tommy Harris ain't walking through that door, huh?
No.
It's tough. It's tough because this is a defense that's always prioritized having a good penetrating 3 technique. Now they have some good interior linemen that I like. I love Dex personally. I think he's somebody who can kind of float around and play multiple spots. They have some really good young talented pieces that I like, but if I'm looking at this front 4, knowing that in the modern NFL, you only really want guys to play like half the snaps, right? So their front 4, I think, is good enough to get pressure with 4. When they have to rotate guys in and they're bringing in their second wave, I don't necessarily think that their second wave is good enough to get pressure with 4, especially in the interior. So that kind of creates a situation where, based on who's on the field, now we almost have to tip our hand of like, if we're getting there, we're getting there with fire zones. There's an old coaching expression from my buddy Coach Vass, where if you can't get there with 4, send 5. If you can't get there with 5, send 6. If you can't get there with 6, send 7. If you can't get there with 7, drop 8. And I think that might be what we see happen throughout this season in Chicago, which is that front 4, the first wave, they're going to get there. You start bringing in guys off the bench, you're going to start seeing more fire zones. You're going to start seeing more man blitzes, because that's the only way I think they're going to get there. It can work. It can absolutely work. I think the secondary is good enough to make it work and kind of buy these guys a little time, but it is threading a little bit of a needle. I think the defense is going to be good again. I just wish they had a little bit more depth up front, so it could not just be good, but it could be dominant. That's